The Downtown Rams podcast is brought to you today by Draft. Looking for the best fantasy sports site on the planet? Sign up with Draft today. For a limited time only, our listeners will receive $3 matching their first deposit of at least $10. Use promo code DTR or visit draft.com/DTR to sign up now. Draft. Fantasy for the people. Now enjoy the show.
Caught by Brandon Cooks. Shoot your arrows. Cooper Kupp plucks it out of the air and gives the Rams the lead. Robert Wood, touchdown. LA. Goff goes crashing into the end zone. Aaron Donald almost beat the football there. Corey Littleton, have yourself a day. Picked off. Marcus Peters coming off the edge. And Ryan will be wrapped up by Clay Matthews. Everett in stride. Wow.
Franklin Myers gets his hand down there.
Leto got a hand on it. Did he pick it? He did! Racing down the sideline is a key to lead. Gurley for MVP! Touchdown LA! Picked off by John Johnson. Well, it's Dante Fowler who is able to get to Breeze. Greg Zuerlein sends the Rams to the Super Bowl! LA will play for the Lombardi!
Welcome back, guys, to another Downtown Rams podcast. It is episode 240. I'm your host, Jake Ellenbogen. Unable to join me today is Alexis Kraft, but I do have a friend of mine, somebody that knows the Panthers very well. And as you guys know, the Panthers and Rams are playing tomorrow. It is Bill Riccette, and he is actually with Downtown Rams. We're really lucky to have him, but he's also with Panthers Wire. Thanks so much for coming on, Bill. Really happy to have you on.
Yeah, absolutely, Jake. Glad to be here and glad to talk football with you. Hopefully Alexis is doing well, and can't wait to hear you guys back together. I got a chance to listen to you guys talk to Mina Kimes, and I thought that was really cool. So props to you guys for really doing a great job here so far.
Hey, I appreciate that, man. It's been a lot of fun. Obviously, having Mina on just was kind of the icing on the cake, I felt like, because, we had a pretty fun preseason, although a lot of guys that we really liked and had fun watching got cut. But Mina was in the booth, and, she was able to give some extra insight on that. And, we really enjoyed that. So, happy to have her on, and now really excited to have you on because, if I was to go to anybody, about the Panthers, I think I'd go to you first. I think you really know this team. You really understand this team. I know the NFL pretty well. I know, most depth charts around the league. But I have to say, I don't know as much as the diehard Panthers fan or somebody that really spends a lot of time following the team. So, we bring you on today with, pretty fun episode planned ahead. The Rams are playing the Panthers. They're kicking off their week one, oddly on the East Coast in Carolina. It's a 1:00 game. It'll probably be one of the only 1:00 games they play. And, we just are going to basically go down the rope here, position by position. And then really just anything that really comes to your mind that you want to kind of add on will be fun. I do know that now, Cam Newton is going to play. I do remember not long ago he was in a walking boot. So, I'm a little different. I know a lot of fans just want to get the W. I always want my team to, beat the other team at full strength. I'm not really a huge fan of like, oh yes, he's not going to play, especially a team coming off, a Super Bowl appearance. So with that being said, just talking about the quarterbacks, let's start with Jared Goff and Cam Newton. Let's compare the two. I just want to get your thoughts on both of them heading into this game.
Yeah, we'll start with Goff. This is, I think, an important season for him. Number one, of course, he just got the big contract extension, right? He's now one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL. He's getting the most guaranteed money ever in the NFL. So I think there's a little bit of pressure from that sense. I think he has to definitely step up now and prove that he's worth that money, prove that he really can continue to lead this offense. Obviously it helps that he has Sean McVay, but he just needs to continue to go out and execute. It's also important, I think, too, because this will be his first game since the Super Bowl, and obviously the Super Bowl did not go the way Goff and the Rams really wanted it to. For lack of a better term, it wasn't all that great. Now, what kind of Super Bowl, we always talk about Super Bowl hangovers, especially for the losing team. Well, how is that going to affect the Rams, and how is that going to affect Goff, and especially now that he has all this contract. So I think there's a little bit of pressure, but I think having McVay and having just all the talent surrounding him, with the receivers and the backs and even the offensive line, I think Goff is still in a good position to just continue to perform. And I think he's going to be fine. I think McVay is going to do a nice job kind of settling him down and trying to help keep the pressure off. But first game, especially with really not playing in the preseason, there might be some early game jitters. There might be some hit or miss moments like we saw in the Thursday night game between Green Bay and Chicago. So Goff's going to be really interesting to watch. And then, of course, you flip over to Cam Newton. Cam Newton, I think, is another interesting position coming off last season. The shoulder injury, of course, was the big reason why the Panthers lost 7 straight games and ultimately missed the playoffs. Because if you remember, once upon a time, this team was 6-2. And they were cruising through the regular season and possibly heading toward a division title. They were 1 game back of the Saints at the midway point because, of course, for as strong as the Panthers were rolling, the Saints were rolling even better at 7-1. But then the wheels just completely fell off, and it really started with that Thursday game against the Steelers. What's that?
Oh, yeah, no, I was just saying that was brutal.
It was. It honestly was, and I think you could tell that's when the wheels started to really fall off for the Panthers. But now he has had his surgery. He's recovered. The shoulder looks good. He's been throwing very well. You mentioned the walking boot. I think that was more precautionary. It was only a preseason game, and it was still in the first half of the preseason game. The Panthers are probably going to start pulling their starters shortly thereafter anyway. So this was more just to kind of get Newton out of there, avoid further injury, get him healthy. You had 2.5 weeks to get him ready, and he's been out there. He hasn't even been on the injury report. So he's good to go. So, they went out and they drafted Will Grier, but that was more of a future type deal, especially now that Will Grier didn't even beat out Kyle Allen for the number 2 job. So Cam Newton, I think both these quarterbacks, like I said, are in interesting positions. I think 2019 is going to be a very, we'll say, monumental, if that's the right word to use. I think you guys kind of catch my drift in terms of, how important these seasons are for these two guys in terms of improvement when it comes to Goff, or obviously health-wise when it comes to Cam Newton. So there's a lot of storylines factoring into these two. So I think it's going to be a really good battle tomorrow between those two.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. When I look at, for instance, Jared Goff coming off that game, he had a couple throws that were there and obviously were dropped. And I think he fought at the end. The interception really obviously was the thing that just ended everything. But, I like to see that he at least fought at the end. It wasn't that he was getting, bullied and all that. He led the team down the field, had a chance, and, unfortunately Cooks dropped it. There might have been PI, but, I'm not really, interested in talking about all that. But, the fact of the matter is the Rams clearly saw Jared Goff take the next step, whether it be in camp, whether it be in, last year, it was enough to get that extension to him. And, I just think this has obviously been, in the making for a little bit. Obviously, he was going to be their franchise quarterback, and it goes higher than just, Sean McVay. But to me, I think coming in this game, I think the Rams, I know they're on the road. I know you kind of have to, when the season starts, it's hard, right? When you play on the road, you can't run your normal offense. Things just don't click as well as, say, week 8. And we saw that last year against Oakland. We saw the Oakland game. They took a while to really get going, and we knew this wasn't a good Oakland football team. And so that was a little bit of a worry. But in the second half, when everything got going, the Rams looked pretty good. And I think that's kind of going to be, how that goes, this Sunday. I think Jared Goff is going to have a really good, really good game played. I just think really the weapons are all there now. He didn't have Cooper Kupp in the Super Bowl. And I think because of that, the Rams were able to experience something more with Joshua Reynolds, who they drafted in the 4th round that same year. And, I'm excited to see that, wide receiver group, pretty much the weapons, they're, another year in the system. They're more experienced and they're now healthy. And they added, Darrell Henderson to that mix. So it should be interesting. But, for Jared Goff, I definitely see a good game played out of him. Now, Cam Newton, the thing with Cam Newton is that, it's the mobility factor. It's just that, Goff can't match that. So I think, you're looking at a traditional pocket passer with Jared Goff, but obviously Cam Newton. And I think he's gotten better at really making plays with his arm. And, I think, just the moves that they've made and obviously having somebody like Christian McCaffrey to kind of, dump the ball off if there's nothing there has really been huge. Not to mention the fact that he could honestly play wide receiver in this league if he wanted to. He's very talented as a route runner and as a receiver. But I think Cam Newton has the weapons as well. I think people discount, the development that DJ Moore is likely going to display in year 2. So, I think that's definitely going to help. Curtis Samuel, again, I think Christian McCaffrey's huge, and they have, Greg Olsen, Ian Thomas, a guy I really like long-term. So I think the weapons are there. I think really it's going to, it's really going to rely on how they want to manage the game, because like I said, it's the first game of the year. Is this going to be kind of a throwing match? Who throws the ball more, who airs it out more, or is it going to, rely on these running backs? And, I kind of want to touch now on, Todd Gurley versus Christian McCaffrey, or rather Todd Gurley, Malcolm Brown, and Darrell Henderson versus Christian McCaffrey and Jordan Scarlett. So, what are your thoughts on, the running back position there, and, just compare the two, I guess.
Yeah, I think if we're talking the running back groups as a whole, I think you kind of have to like where the Rams are as a whole a little bit more than the Panthers. The Rams at least have a little bit of more experience in total in the backfield when you factor in more Malcolm Brown versus say Jordan Scarlett, who effectively is the number 2, because the Panthers right now really only have a rookie in Jordan Scarlett and a second-year undrafted free agent in Reggie Bonnafon. And then, of course, they ended up keeping Elijah Holyfield on the practice squad. But at least Malcolm Brown has been in the league a couple of years. I was a little surprised to see them cut John Kelly, but, clearly they're high on Darrell Henderson. And it wouldn't surprise me to see him get a little bit of work tomorrow, because, we still don't know how effective Todd Gurley is going to be, how much they're going to play him, how much is that knee still bothering him. So a lot of questions surrounding the Rams backfield, but even just a limited Todd Gurley can still provide you some really good value. And then you sprinkle Henderson in there, who we know is a fantastic running back at Memphis. So I think there's a lot of combinations that you could do there with the Rams. So I'm really excited to see what McVay does with that group. With the Panthers, look, Christian McCaffrey at this point needs no introduction. We know what he is. He broke through in year 2. He proved that he can run between the tackles. That was his biggest question from his rookie year to his second year, is can he run in between the tackles? And he proved without a shadow of a doubt that he can absolutely do that. And now, you look around even all these fantasy drafts and how high he's being drafted, because we know how much he's being used, obviously not just in the passing game, but not just in the running game, but a lot in the passing game. There's talks of Christian McCaffrey possibly going for 1,000 rushing yards and 1,000 receiving yards, which I think is entirely possible with this offense and the way a lot of it is going to run through him. So, it's just a matter of, because Ron Rivera has talked at times about trying to cut back a little bit on, either the workload or the snap count, whatever, with Christian McCaffrey. But now you really don't have the players that can keep McCaffrey off the field for a long period of time. You're not going to go out there and give Jordan Scarlett 10 touches a game. He's going to be a guy that he'll just come in every now and then, maybe run a play or two, maybe catch a pass out of the backfield. But for the most part, you're going to see a lot of Christian McCaffrey. So as long as he stays healthy, this offense is going to run through him. So, week one, I don't think you're going to see him pulled too much. I think he'll let him because he's still fresh, because he didn't play much in the preseason either. I mean, you figure this is a matchup of teams where really not many players on both sides of the ball played a lot in the preseason. The Rams obviously didn't play at all. The Panthers really only played in the third preseason game, and that was only about a quarter and a half before Cam Newton had that injury. But with McCaffrey, I think you're going to see him really be utilized a lot here in week one, and then maybe over the first half of the season, maybe Rivera cuts back a little bit to keep him fresher for the second half of the season. That remains to be seen what that game plan is. But week one, I would expect to see a heavy dosage of Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with you there. It kind of falls on while I did mention earlier that Cam Newton has his weapons in the receiver group, they're not extremely deep there. We talked off air that they picked up a couple guys in waivers after the cutdowns. So I mean, obviously they're not extremely deep there, and maybe the reason for that and the construction of the roster is they look at Christian McCaffrey as somebody that is running back, wide receiver. I know that's kind of, a fantasy football position, but that might actually be the case with him. And, even so, I think he's kind of the ingredient if you want to try and upset this Rams team at home to kick off the season and really, push your season to kind of the next level, as far as starting off the season beating, the NFC champions. I think Christian McCaffrey is going to have a heavy dose of action in that offense. I think he's probably going to have to be the focal point. And, I really like, I like Jordan Scarlett as well. I think you guys, getting rid of, I think when you guys decided to pick Jordan Scarlett out of Florida, I thought that definitely made a lot of sense. The one guy, I'm completely forgetting his name, the guy with the hyphenated name that you guys got. Yeah, Cameron Artis-Payne. I was a little surprised to see you guys get rid of him because I do know that, he was part of that offense for the last 2 years. I'm not saying he was a focal point, but, he was a guy that, definitely could provide some depth there at running back. So, I do really, really like Scarlett coming out of Florida, but I think, like you said, Christian McCaffrey is getting drafted in the top 3 in fantasy leagues. I mean, I think people know and they can expect, what he's about. Really, he proved that he can run in between the tackles, like you said. He's just proven that he is an all-around back, despite whatever stigma that, people wanted to generate, if you know what I mean. He is an all-around NFL running back. He's top 5 in the league, and he is going to be, paramount to see any bit of success out of this Panthers offense. He is going to be the driving force. And I think he's really going to help Cam Newton as well, because Cam Newton, I think really the issue with him is kind of, do we start to see these injuries creep up? And dare I say it, does Cam Newton start to be called injury prone? You never want to get into that, conversation. So, I think it's really good for the Panthers to have somebody like McCaffrey. And I'm honestly looking forward to both of these guys, Todd and McCaffrey. When you look at Todd Gurley, this is somebody in his own right that has also, he's been questioned up and down. I mean, I would say he's arguably the best running back in football. He's kind of proven that over the last 2 years, having 40 touchdowns total. I just think, in my opinion, I mean, this is somebody that was on track to break LaDainian Tomlinson's touchdown record in a single season. And, he sat down right before the end zone on 2 different occasions. So he sacrificed 2 touchdowns for obviously the good of the team. Got a lot of flack from those degenerate gamblers, but that's neither here nor there. But my point is that, I mean, this guy is the best running back in football in my mind. And now it's like this injury comes up, and obviously it's bad. It's not good to have arthritis in your knee. And it's been confirmed, but And the fact of the matter is, I think it's overblown. I think I've said it over and over again. I think really what it means is that he's not going to be Frank Gore, be able to play until he's 35, 36 years old. But right now, I don't see it really affecting him. I think really it's a matter of if the Rams want to kind of hold back that load a little bit and, not really push anything too hard. And, and you have guys like Malcolm Brown, Malcolm Brown could probably start on a couple teams in this league. And then Darrell Henderson, he was my number one running back in the draft. So they have a lot of talent there. I think Henderson's going to be used more as like an Alvin Kamara, the way he was used when he first came in the NFL. And they were using him a lot in camp as a receiver. So that'll be interesting. But, Sean McVay kind of let us know Todd is not going to be on a pitch count. And they aren't really looking at the way the rest of the media is looking at it. So it's a huge game for Todd Gurley because all we've heard is how this guy, in a 13-3 loss in the Super Bowl, this guy easily could have been the difference maker to win the football game, and he wasn't really used often. And so people, obviously speculated that the injury was worse than it was. And this is his chance now. He's heard the whole off season, and like you brought up, Rams don't play their starters in preseason, so it'll be interesting. McCaffrey, obviously one of the best running backs in football. He's going to be vital for this game, but I think Todd Gurley, this could be, he really needs to make a statement and just kind of, shut up the media that has been kind of trashing him the whole, off season.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think, and you brought up a good point about the not having the pitch count. I think that's going to be really important to, really get a feel of how that knee is going to hold up. So, two stud running backs, is the bottom line here. We're looking at two great running backs. I think it's just going to be exciting to see. A really nice, really good matchup here to kick off the regular season, to have two high quality backs, both who went in the top 10, get a chance to battle each other on the same field. So really, really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, and you don't get that very often. So I think it's something that
especially nowadays.
Yeah, exactly. And I think these are two of the only guys really that aren't in Emmy. I know people want to say that Todd Gurley is going to have, this big limit, but these guys, for the most part, from what we know, they're not in committee backfields. So, it's becoming a lot less around the league where you see, guys not in committee backfield. So, it's really just guys like Todd Gurley, Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, Le'Veon Bell, Zeke Elliott. And now with Elliott, of course, having, Tony Pollard in there, who knows? But, I just think it's really cool anytime you get, a matchup like this. Obviously they don't go head to head, but, you see them on both sides of the football. Moving on to the receiver group. We got, obviously mentioned it a little bit. I think you guys have some talent, obviously, the Panthers, DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel. Chris Hogan is somebody that kind of tailed off at the end of the year last year for the Patriots, but I don't think it was a bad pickup. And then, of course, Christian McCaffrey is going to be used in the receiving game. And then, you look at the Rams, and the Rams, obviously, they have Brandon Cooks, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, Josh Reynolds, and they've come out and basically said that they're going to have a four-headed monster. They're going to use Josh Reynolds a lot. And part of that is because they were able to see what Josh Reynolds was last year when Cooper Kupp went down. They also have Mike Thomas, they have JoJo Natson, and they have Nasimba Webster. I don't think we'll see much of those guys because I think they're really going to put a premium on having four receivers, having somebody like Darrell Henderson that can come in and be a receiver. And then, of course, the tight ends that we'll get into. But, just comparing those two units, what are your thoughts on those?
Yeah, again, two talented pieces on both sides. You really have to like what the Rams have at wide receiver, like you said. Robert Woods has really come into his own since coming into the Rams. He was kind of like a forgotten man before he came to the Rams, during his time with Buffalo and others. But, he comes to the Rams, he comes to this offense, and it just seems like he's a perfect fit. It's nice when these kind of things just gel so well together, and that's what happened with Woods. And obviously it's a really nice mix of a lot of receivers. Woods is kind of your taller type receiver that can move around the field well. Cooks continues to show he's a deep threat, but he'll still get you a lot of yards. Cooper Kupp, we got a chance to see him at the Senior Bowl that year, and he impressed well in those practices, and then he's carried that over for a couple of years now here with the Rams in the pros. And then, like you said, even Josh Reynolds as a number 4 receiver who really, did all he could, really came into his own in replace of Cooper Kupp. So, it's a legit 4 deep for the Rams. And, so you never know where the ball's going to go at any given moment. So, and we'll obviously touch on defense in a little bit, but for a secondary like the Panthers, it's going to be really tough, I think, for them to try to match up to these guys. They're really going to have to keep their head on a swivel with all these guys coming at them. So, really, really impressed with the way the Rams have just been able to build and develop talent at that position. And then you look at the Panthers group. The top 2 guys really are obviously the 2 big breakout candidates for this season for a lot of people. DJ Moore is the big one, and then Curtis Samuel has really been gaining steam over the last couple of weeks, really since camp started. There was, he started as a bit of a really quiet, really deep sleeper, but with a lot of the highlight catches he's made in camp and just some of his play during the preseason, he's really given everybody more of a reason to believe, okay, this kid's finally figured it out. He had injuries during his rookie season, so he really didn't play much. He had to kind of work his way back at the beginning of last season. There was concerns that not that he would get cut from the Panthers, but just what would his role be with the Panthers? It was already starting to look like it was a wasted second round pick because they just didn't have a spot for him. They couldn't utilize him. How much impact was he really going to have? Well, now he's showing that impact. Now he's showing that he can go down deep. He can go across the middle. He's almost like DJ Moore in a sense, but maybe a little bit faster. And, so having those 2 guys on the field together is going to be really nice, and I think it's going to cause a lot of problems for opposing defenses. And then you add a guy like Jarius Wright, who didn't wow you with his numbers last year, but that's not what he's on the Panthers to do. He's here to give Cam Newton those big catches on third down and maybe score a couple touchdowns. Just continue to move the chains. He's kind of the prototypical possession receiver, but a really good one at that. And then you mentioned Chris Hogan, not a bad pickup for a 4th receiver. And then, you mentioned the 2 guys that they claimed off waivers in Brandon Zylstra from the Vikings and Ray McLeod from the Bills. Both guys I expect, especially McLeod, to be utilized in the return game because these guys essentially were replacing guys like Terry Godwin and Jaden Mickens, who I thought had shots to make the roster themselves, especially Terry Godwin, who I thought kind of had the punt return job sewn up, but as it turned out, he didn't. They were always looking to improve that. They're always kind of churning through that spot. So now it's going to be McLeod's shot. Maybe Zylstra gets a shot. So, really intrigued how all these receivers go. We talked before we started recording about Torrey Smith. I'm not surprised that he ended up getting the cut after the 2 receivers were claimed. That was kind of my first thought when the news broke that the Panthers had claimed 2 receivers. I'm thinking, okay, this probably means Torrey Smith's going to get cut because the Panthers aren't going to keep 7 receivers. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And you're not paying $5 million to a receiver like Torrey Smith, who's going to sit as your 7th receiver and probably never see the field and never really return punts or kicks. So it was kind of a wasted roster spot. But they've got an interesting mix of receivers here. Some veteran receivers, some young receivers. So really, really curious how North Turner is going to kind of utilize a lot of these guys. But again, the big 2 obviously are going to be DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, and how how effective they're going to be both horizontally and vertically, because I'm really excited to watch, especially because Moore's been by a guy since he came out of Maryland. I've really liked his playmaking ability. You saw those flashes last season, and you saw him improve as the season went on. So now he's gotten that full off season to work as the starter, really develop more of a connection with Cam Newton. So he's going to be fun to watch, and I've tried to get DJ Moore just about everywhere I could in fantasy football. That's how excited I am about him. So really going to be fun, I think, to watch these guys.
Yeah, I was a little surprised that you guys didn't end up, drafting a receiver. I just wanted to get your quick thoughts on that before we move to tight end. Did you expect the Panthers to take a receiver in the draft, or did you not really?
Well, they did, but he's no longer on the team, so it ends up being kind of a.
Oh yeah, no, I know, but like early on.
Yeah, I kind of figured if they took a receiver, it would have been, in the mid to late rounds. I didn't really think they needed to take one high. I know there was some people that thought maybe they'd take someone like, the kid at NC State. Maybe Kelvin Harmon was being talked about. A couple others were being talked about, but I never really bought into the idea that they needed to take a receiver high. Especially since you just took a receiver in the first round last year. You don't really need to take a receiver in the first round this year. I think they made the right move, at least in the first round, going with the defensive end, because Brian Burns was there. To me, it was kind of a no-brainer. It really, I think, came between Burns and Dillard, and for me, it would have been an easy call to go with Brian Burns. Maybe in the middle rounds. I mean, if there was a skill position I expected the Panthers to hit during the draft, it would have been backup quarterback, which they did with Will Grier, and backup running back, which they did with Jordan Scarlett. So they kind of went in the directions that I expected them to. And again, like we said, they didn't take a receiver until the 7th round, and as it turns out, he's already off the team, so that kind of negates itself. So, but so they. And it stings, too, because, like I said, I thought Godwin had a shot to make this team with the way he was playing and the way he was returning punts. But, that's the business of the NFL. It's always churning out those bottom of the rosters. It's always looking at players like 50 to 53 and saying, okay, where can we improve here? And unfortunately for Godwin, he was kind of stuck in that cycle.
Yeah, it was definitely surprising to not see him kept on the practice squad either, because he's not on a team right now. I don't think he was claimed. So,
I don't think it was claimed either, no. They actually do have a receiver on the practice squad, but it's actually neither Godwin nor Mickens, interestingly enough. It's actually DeAndre White, who did have a good preseason in his defense. So, I can understand keeping him. But, yeah, he ended up being the only receiver that the Panthers kept.
Yeah, no, it's always interesting when it comes down to that, because the Rams had a couple guys I really like, Nasimba Webster, who they did end up keeping, and Kaderil Hodge, who they ended up letting go, who I think they had the intent of bringing him back to the practice squad, but this is somebody that actually logged some offensive snaps not in preseason, in the Super Bowl, and so I was like, there's no way they're going to bring him back, and the Browns ended up claiming him, so. It's always interesting to see, obviously the coaches see things differently and they're looking from, how can this guy help us in this situation as opposed to just only this situation. And so it's always interesting to see them weigh that out. But with, the tight ends, very interesting. Greg Olsen ended up staying in the NFL. I thought for whatever reason, I thought he was retiring. I mean, he came back, right? Because I totally thought he retired.
He is back. Yes, there were rumblings that Greg Olsen was kind of flirting with a media role or get into media. In fact, I believe he is going to call a game for Fox. I think during the Panthers bye week.
Yeah, I remember him doing that with Charles Davis and I believe Kevin Burkhardt.
Yeah, because I think he did some media work last year too. Because of course he missed basically the second half of the season with that foot injury. But if I'm not mistaken, I believe I read he will call a game for Fox during the Panthers bye week.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think he's great. So I guess it got to the point where I thought he was so good, I just expected him to retire and go ahead and do that. But yeah, it was really interesting because he not only he came back or he stayed or whatever, but then when Jason Witten decided to come out of retirement, it was one of those weird things where like I'm pretty on top of the NFL, but like for a while I was like, Greg Olsen retired. What are you guys talking about? You know what I mean? Like it's very weird. You know, I'm never like that, you know, like ignorant like that, but I totally thought he retired. It's funny how that works. But regardless, you know, you have Greg Olsen, you have Ian Thomas, Chris Manhertz, who I believe you got from he was originally on the Saints. And then you signed him to a contract extension for what I believe. The Rams,
gave him a 2-year extension.
They just signed Tyler Higbee to a 4-year, $31 million deal. That definitely had some pushback on it from the fan base. They draft Gerald Everett, of course, in the second round, a few seasons ago. And then they have somebody who, for whatever reason, like I'm listening to preseason games and it's not the team centric broadcast, so I get it, but I always get a kick out of it. How it was like the Raiders broadcast. They were like, yeah, you know, I just look at Johnny Munt and I think like, yeah, he's definitely going to be a piece for this team because he's a blocking tight end. And I'm like, Johnny Munt can't block. He's just an athletic tight end from Oregon that had injury issues. So I always get a kick out of that. But so I mean, that's really what we're looking at here. What are your thoughts on the two, positions? I think they're relatively even. I'd give the edge to the Panthers because I think Greg Olsen, he's not the same tight end he used to be, but I still think he's probably the best out of all the ones I mentioned. And I really like Ian Thomas's long-term potential as not only just a receiver, but I think he can really turn into, a great all-around tight end. I'm a big fan of Gerald Everett, and I do like Tyler Higbee, but I feel like those guys in Carolina are going to have more of a role than the guys with the Rams, obviously, because there's just too many mouths to feed in LA. But what are your thoughts?
Well, first, I just want to touch, like you were saying about, the preseason, the announcers. That's one of the reasons I don't like the preseason, or I hate just watching some of the games, because you could just tell that some of the announcers are just so biased, and it's like, oh, we actually have to sit through and listen to this. Like, the Rams were not bad. I'll tell you what, Andrew Siciliano is an absolute professional. He's just so good at his job. And, like I said earlier, I heard you guys talking to Mina Kimes, and she praised him so much, and deservedly so. He's just a consummate professional, really calling the game down the middle. So I'm sure he was fantastic to work with. And I've gotten to see him. I haven't gotten a chance to meet him, but I've seen him at some of these NFL events. And yes, he's not very tall, we'll say. So, but yeah, in terms of these two tight end groups, you're right. These are definitely two good tight end groups, but. And then I was looking while you were talking about Greg Olsen, just to confirm, he is going to call the Giants against the Cardinals in Week 7 for Fox with Kenny Albert. So that'll be interesting.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Clearly he's getting ready for the broadcast booth, so we'll see. That this will be kind of his big opportunity, so we'll see what happens. But you're right. I think he definitely is, even with the past injuries, and obviously aging a bit because he's in his mid-30s now. You could definitely still say that Greg Olsen is the best tight end among the two groups here, and he looks healthy, and he's always been that top security blanket for Cam Newton, so that connection is going to continue. So it's nice to have him back, fully healthy and ready to go. And I'm with you, man. Ian Thomas is going to be fantastic. I've been on the Ian Thomas hype train ever since the Panthers drafted him. Because I even still remember it was the 100th pick of the draft. This was the first pick of the 4th round. There was some buzz. There was some talk that teams were trying to move up to get that pick from the Panthers, but the Panthers did not budge from that pick. And that's because they wanted to take Ian Thomas, and you could see why. He is a fantastic pass catching tight end. Obviously the numbers really didn't show it at Indiana, but that's because of the style of offense that Indiana runs. They really don't utilize the tight end all that much. I think he only had 25 catches either in the season or in his career, something like that. It was a very low number, but just in that small sample size, we'll say, that's the word I'm looking for. Sorry. In that small sample size, you could tell that Ian Thomas can really be effective in the passing game. And like you said, I think he can get better in the run game and really just become a terrific all-around tight end. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that this year. Now that he's in his second year in the league, you're going to see a lot of two tight end sets, whether it's Olsen and Thomas or Olsen and Manhertz, whatever the case may be. Because Manhertz really is just your blocking tight end. That's all he really does. He'll catch like maybe 2 passes all season, but if you need a blocking tight end, he's the way to go. But and Ian Thomas was somebody I got a chance to talk to ask Ron Rivera about at the Combine. Just kind of a general idea or his general thoughts of what he's looking for from year 1 to year 2. And, Rivera's just looking for a lot more consistency out of Ian Thomas because he was kind of up and down, especially in the second half of the season when Olsen went down and Thomas got a chance to step in as the number 1 tight end. He'd have some games where he'd have a few catches and a pretty good line, but then there'd be games where he seemed to just completely disappear. We just want to see some more consistency out of Thomas here in year 2, especially now that we're obviously starting to get closer to him kind of taking the baton, as it were, from Greg Olsen. So he's definitely a candidate or a hopeful candidate to make that jump and just continue to take those steps toward being a much better tight end. And then, of course, on the Rams side, you mentioned the contract extension for Tyler Higbee. And, a nice story just in general for Tyler Higbee, because we know the issues that he ran into during his time at Western Kentucky, namely off the field, that kind of led to him falling in the draft the way he did, because he could have been maybe a day 2 pick if it wasn't for all that stuff. But in the end, he ended up falling to the Rams in round 4. But obviously he's kind of cleaned up his act. He's, performed well on and off the field, and he was rewarded with that big contract extension. But, I really like Gerald Everett as well. I actually drafted Everett in the Scott Fish Bowl. It was a really late pick, but I figured, tight ends are a little bit of a premium in that league because it's the full point PPR and full point per first down for tight ends versus running backs and receivers. So, late in the draft, a guy like Everett, because the Rams are going to throw the ball quite a bit, take a stab at Everett. But you're right. There are a lot of mouths to feed on this Rams offense. We talked about the 4 wide receivers. We talked about now 2 tight ends. We talked about all the running backs that can get involved in the passing game. So, I mean, there's just so much talent that, how do you keep everybody happy? But the Rams have done a really nice job of doing that, of keeping everybody happy and keeping this offense just at a nice, steady pace. But, the tight ends have certainly been a part of that as well. I think especially Higbee, you've really started to see the gradual steps taken by Higbee. I think he's slowly gotten better over these first couple of years that he's been in the league. And, like I said, obviously, that's why he was rewarded with the contract extension. I think both with his production on the field and just the fact that he really turned himself around and kind of put those red flags that he had in college behind him. So really nice to see him turn things around and get himself on the straight and narrow. But you're right. Overall, both of these tight end groups I think are really good. But the Panthers definitely have that veteran edge with Greg Olsen. But we'll see how much time Greg Olsen has left. you know, I mean, the fact that he's calling a game for Fox while he's still an active player kind of tells you that, at least in the back of his mind, he's already starting to think about life after the NFL. But for now, he's healthy, and I think he's ready to continue to be a key cog in this offense.
Yeah, and that really that's all you can ask for, you know. I think, yeah, like you said, I like both position groups. I don't think either are like top notch. But again, you know, there's a lot of upside there. You know, you talk about Thomas, Higbee, and Gerald Everett, and really, I look at Higbee. I think this isn't going to be somebody that is going to have 700 receiving yards because there's just, again, too many mouths to feed. He's either the 6th, 7th, or 8th option. But what Higbee could do and be really effective doing it if he has gotten better at, you know, obviously as a 50-50 ball type of receiver, I think really what you could see out of Higbee is somebody like, you know, Eric Ebron, like designated for, you know, the red zone. And I think if he could really become that guy, I mean, that deal would really just make too much sense because, I mean, I've always said it, and I've heard guys in the scouting academy say it. It really feels like every team needs their own designated position, like red zone specialists, right? Because it's like we don't put enough of a premium on how important it is to put points on the board in the red zone and not settle for field goals. When you settle for field goals, you put 3 points on the board. You know, you feel good because you got points, but you feel like, you know, there could have been something more. Well, the problem is it doesn't matter how many times you do that. If you do that 10 times, it's 30 points. If the other team scores touchdowns more than 10 times and kicks field goals the other time, they beat you. So, you know, that's always the problem is if you settle and you can't stop the other team, doesn't matter how many times you're arriving in the red zone. If you can't put up touchdowns, you know, you're going to have an issue. So I think, you know, having somebody like Higbee, who's 6'5", you know, has a really filled out body at around 250. See, Gerald Everett, to me, he's more of a bigger receiver, kind of like Evan Ingram, just not as, you know, athletic. He is very athletic, but just not Ingram's level. But, you know, with him, he's not somebody that can really go up and do that. He's 6'2". He's kind of an undersized tight end. Higbee's the big guy. So this is somebody you could take advantage of in doing that. And so I'm hoping that's how they're going to use him, because if not, it's going to be hard to really get him involved in the passing game. And as a blocker, while he's improved, he hasn't improved enough for me to call him a blocking tight end yet. So with that being said, moving on, we have the offensive lines. And, you know, this is really interesting because the Rams had the Bill Ford-Tuft offensive line of the year last year. They lose a key cog in that. Roger Saffold's gone, and he's a Pro Bowl talent. Then they lose John Sullivan, who, I mean, basically they let go. I'll tell you this, you know, from seeing every game, Sullivan offers a ton as a veteran presence, a ton as somebody that can be that of a leader, can help a younger quarterback like Jared Goff out. But he is by no means the same John Sullivan that we saw when he thrived in Minnesota, and, you know, was broken down and did have a hard time really, you know, holding his blocks and holding his own. You know, so I think now you add the rookie, or not the rookie, but the first year starter, Brian Allen. You know, I think that'll definitely be interesting. Somebody that I wasn't extremely high on, but the Rams drafted in the 4th round out of Michigan State, a guy that has kind of that mean streak to him. And then they drafted, 3rd round pick, Joseph Noteboom in 2018. He's really one of the only guys of that draft class to really get on the field. John Franklin Myers being another one that was surprisingly cut. But, you know, Joseph Noteboom is somebody that, you know, he got on the field last year a little bit in relief, you know, taking a couple snaps here and there. And he ended up logging about 60 to 80 snaps. He looked good in those snaps, but they draft him to be a tackle. And right now, I think he's kind of in that, the purgatory period of kind of being that guard for the time being while you have a Hall of Famer and Andrew Whitworth at left tackle. So, you know, I think it'll definitely be interesting when you have 2 starters and you have 2 veterans go out the door, especially somebody like Roger Saffold. There's going to be some turnover, and because of the turnover, there's going to be, you know, it's not going to be perfect. And so I think the Rams offense is going to really have to obviously sustain just giving Jared Goff average, pocket time, right? As long as he gets average, I think he'll be fine. It's anything below that. It's, Deshaun Watson territory pocket time. It's going to be worrisome because it's already bad for Deshaun Watson, and he has all the mobility in the world. Jared Goff simply does not. So, obviously they have Rob Havenstein. They got a really good year, or first 11 games out of Austin Blythe, who was a surprise, really struggled towards the end of the year. So hopefully, he's able to kind of go back to, before the struggling Austin Blythe that we know. But really, in the nutshell, the Rams have a lot of issues because they don't have depth at offensive line. They have a bunch of guys that have, upside, like Bobby Evans, who I'm not as high on, but, they draft him because of upside. David Edwards, Jamil Demby, and they brought in Coleman Shelton onto the 53-man roster after he was waived by the Cardinals. But, I mean, there's just not depth, right? So there's not established guys. But then when you look at the Panthers, they have, Darrell Williams, they have Matt Paradis, who I think that was really such an underrated signing, such a great signing, because you're getting one of the best centers in football, and no one's talking about that. I think that'll definitely be something to watch, because they were able to replace Ryan Khalil. He was another obviously great player. Trey Turner, and of course they have Taylor Moton. He's a former, I believe he was a former second round pick that I was really high on coming out of Western Kentucky, but or not Western Kentucky, Western Michigan. But I just want to get your thoughts on those two position groups together. I think definitely. I know Greg Little's hurt right now. I know people made fun of his, his testing, similar to Orlando Brown, but Greg Little is talented. Greg Little's probably better than anybody that is on the Rams bench on the offensive line. And then I really do like Dennis Daly. And of course, they have guys like Tyler Lawson and Brandon Green that, again, I don't think that they're great either, but I think that they have they have more depth than the Rams. But, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we look at the Rams line. You're right. It's quite the turnover, right? You lose some big names, like you said. Roger Saffold, who really, really turned things around because he was looking like he was going to be a bust. But he comes to the Rams, he gets plugged at guard, and all of a sudden he becomes a great guard, and now he's gone. So Joe Noteboom, who has had an interesting run so far. It came out of TCU, looked like he was going to be a solid tackle, third round pick, but like you said, there's just no room for him at the tackle position right now, because you've got one of the best tackles in the league in Andrew Whitworth, and then Rob Havenstein, who's still a solid tackle in his own right, another guy who just got paid by the Rams. So just real quick, real nice job by the Rams to find a way to get all this money and just get all these long-term contracts for all these guys. That's something I kind of touched on when I wrote the piece on Goff, how they have all these players locked up for so long. I think it was Goff and I think Aaron Donald, or Goff and somebody else are locked up through 24 now. They have a couple players locked up through 23, a bunch of players locked up through 22. So a lot of the core of this Rams offense is locked up at least until the early to mid 2020s, right? So they're doing a really nice job. But when you have turnover at the offensive line, obviously it's a bit of a challenge, especially at the start of the season. What's one thing we harp on when it comes to the offensive line? It's continuity. It's 5 guys. It's truly, football obviously is a game of 11 players all doing their job, right? But the offensive line is really 5 guys working as one unit. That's really the position where everybody has to be in unison, or everything is going to break down. So when you have constant turnover like that, it takes a while to kind of get up to speed. So we'll see how Joe Noteboom, who now is finally getting a starting role, how he adjusts to playing a guard after being used to tackle all this time. Brian Allen has stepped in, but he was a solid center. And then you talked about Austin Blythe, who started off really well for them at right guard. So are they excuse me, are they as long, or are they as strong, I should say, of an offensive line as they were last year? Maybe not. But did they fall off too far? Not really. I think it's still a solid offensive line. I think they'll be fine in protecting Jared Goff and keeping this offense going. So it's really going to be interesting to see. And then, you talked about the 2 draft picks and Bobby Evans and David Edwards. It's still interesting to see that David Edwards, because this was a guy that was kind of talked up a good bit by some members of the draft media, and he winds up falling all the way to the 5th round. So, we'll see how he develops. We'll see, after Whitworth goes, possibly after this year, what they do at the left tackle position. Is it going to be Boom? Is it going to be Edwards? We'll see what happens. But on the flip side with the Panthers, we're finally talking about the Panthers offensive line as not a question mark, right? That was arguably their biggest Achilles heel last season, was the offensive line. And, because you're entering the season, or you were entering the season with Matt Khalil as your left tackle, or at least you were going into preseason with Matt Khalil as your starting left tackle, and he goes down with injury, and then Darrell Williams misses most of camp with an injury, comes back for the season opener, gets injured again, is out for the year. So now you're getting Taylor Moton out there, and you're thrusting Chris Clark out there, and eventually Marshall Newhouse. It was just an absolute mess. Well, now you have Darrell Williams over at left tackle, because you saw what we kind of already knew when he came into the league. Taylor Moton is a really good offensive tackle. I'm right there with you. I was a huge fan of his coming out of Western Michigan. I saw him at the Senior Bowl. Instantly became one of my man crushes in that draft. And so and the Panthers like him on the right side, so that's why they kept him there. That's why they moved Darrell Williams to left tackle. And then, someone that I don't think you mentioned, he's kind of an underrated player. Not too many people really kind of credit him a whole lot, but Greg Van Roten at left guard. Greg Van Roten actually was the only offensive player to play every single offensive snap for the Panthers in 2018. So he kind of, he's not the strongest offensive lineman. He's not the greatest offensive lineman, but he gets the job done. He'll plug up that left guard hole. So he's done what he can to try to fill the void that was left by Andrew Norwell 2 seasons ago. So at least he's out there. And you talked about Matt Paradis. The Panthers were never even really, or at least it seemed like the Panthers were never really in on him, because there was no talk that the Panthers were meeting with him, or really any talks of contracts or anything like that, or any kind of connections. I think the team that seemed to be most talked about with Matt was the Baltimore Ravens. And then all of a sudden,
that's what I heard too.
Yeah. A lot of talk was the Ravens were really high on him. They were really trying to get him, and then all of a sudden, Carolina swoops in and nabs him for 3 years. I think $24 million. And like you said, that's a really good signing, especially after Ryan Khalil, initially retired, and of course has since unretired. But to easily fill that role with Paradis is just a great move. And then Trey Turner is just a constant cog at right guard. So all of a sudden the Panthers are now in a much better position at the offensive line this year at week 1 versus last year at week 1. Is it perfect? Not really. Like I said, Greg Van Roten, he's all right. He gets the job done. Can you improve on him? Absolutely. But right now the Panthers really don't have anybody to improve on him. Eventually they will. When you get guys like Greg Little developed, you can get him at left tackle. You get Dennis Daly developed. Maybe he can go at left guard, because Daly's been moving around. They're trying to work out Daly at basically every position except center. So they really like what they have in Daly. And then you mentioned Tyler Larson. He's the backup center. And then Brandon Green they really like as well. So at least they have a little bit of depth at the offensive line. But like you said, Greg Little dealing with the concussion. So, right now you really don't want injuries. You're just hoping that these are guys that just provide you really good backups. But, overall, I like where the Panthers stand on the offensive line. Like I said, I feel a lot better about the position now than I did going into last year. It's nice to have a guy like a healthy Darrell Williams at left guard versus someone like Matt Khalil.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. And, I think the other thing is, I think you just, it's a good foundation for your offensive line where you're like, okay, we know what these guys are. We don't know what these guys are. So you identify, obviously you want Greg Little and you want Dennis Daly, two rookies to come in and be able to, have that preparation and start to develop into something that, can be part of your long-term future. But for somebody like Greg Van Roten, like you said, he's he's replaceable. I honestly like the position you're in a little bit more than the Rams, and the reason I say that, and I know Rams fans probably hate that I'm saying this, but I do like the front five of the Rams. I think that is one of the best offensive lines in football. It's just obviously there's some question marks. It's the depth, right? So the depth is the worst because the thing about the Rams' depth, it's not depth, it's all potential, like I said. And so what that does is it makes drafting a lot harder because you draft Bobby Evans, you trade up, you get him in the third round. You draft, David Edwards, you get him in the fifth round. Jameel Demby's a sixth round pick out of Maine. And then you have Coleman Shelton. I mean, really, when you draft guys like that, you draft them so early, it's kind of hard to be like the next year drafting more offensive linemen, early on in the draft, because it's like, what are you going to do with them? You have two first-year starters, in the lineup. Havenstein he's going to be entering his prime soon if he hasn't already. Whitworth is likely going to retire after this year, but could, hang on for another year. And then, Blythe is somebody, he's still young and they could extend him. After that, the four guys in the back, there's no like, I mean, they had Jamon Brown, but there's nobody in the back like, Tyler Larson, for instance. There's no, Tom Compton. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Tom Compton, but my point is they don't have an established backup. So because they have all of that potential, all of that upside, all of that, question, it's kind of hard to go ahead and evaluate and be like, yeah, we're going to draft, three offensive linemen to solve our depth issue, because it's then now you have to, with offensive linemen, they don't get the same preparation they used to. They don't have the same, they can't practice the same as they used to because of the CBA. So it's really hard to develop offensive linemen in today's age. And so it's really interesting. It's going to be hard for them to kind of decipher whether or not they want to, go ahead and develop these three guys or, decide to pull the plug and, draft some more. I mean, that's really my only issue with the Rams offensive line compared to the Panthers. Whereas, you have your starting five with the Panthers. Those are relatively, that's a relatively high pick with, somebody like Greg Little. And I do like Dennis Daly, but you have other guys that are, established backups. So, I guess that's really my issue with that. But, we've really we've just dug so far into the offense. We might have to cut the defense a little short. Otherwise, this podcast will be 2.5 hours. So, to save some time, we'll go with the front seven. We won't go defense tackle, defense end, all that. We'll just go with the front seven. Both teams, I believe, run the 3-4 from what I believe. Well, 3-4 is kind of not doing it justice because Wade runs his multiple defense, really. It's kind of a modified 3-4, more like a 4-3. But regardless, the front seven, with the Panthers, you have Gerald McCoy, you have Dontari Poe, Kawan Short, Mario Addison, Shaq Thompson, Luke Kuechly, and Bruce Irvin, from what we were discussing. Obviously, you have your rookie Brian Burns, who I think was the best pass rusher in this draft. I know people think I'm crazy for saying he, he was better than Nick Bosa, but I thought you guys absolutely got the best value pick of the entire draft. So, props to the Panthers for making that pick. There might have been other guys that they, might have wanted in, a need situation. But like kind of how, obviously I think you got him 14th overall, kind of like how the Rams did. They didn't need the position of defensive line, but in 2014, they took Aaron Donald, and I don't think that they're complaining about that now. So sometimes you just have to take the best player available. So obviously love that they did that. And they also took Christian Miller in the 4th round, somebody I felt was more of a 2nd-round pick. So you have a lot of talent, there. And then you have guys, Marquise Haynes, obviously you have Vernon Butler, somebody I really like. F.A. Obata, who, from what I remember, I read a story about him last year, how he didn't go to college. He's honestly from like overseas, I believe, right? Like he has really an interesting story there.
Yep. Yeah, I think he was born in Nigeria and he grew up in London.
That was crazy. And he's made the roster, and I think he, I thought he looked pretty good last year from, the times I had a chance to see him. And then you look at the Rams, and, they have Michael Brocker, Sebastian Joseph Day, Aaron Donald, Dante Fowler, Clay Matthews, Corey Littleton, Bryce Hager. I can kind of say, we'll talk about the secondary separate, but I can kind of say Taylor Rapp, like / Taylor Rapp there, because he will be in, in the nickel. But, then you have Morgan Fox, Greg Gaines, who they drafted in the 4th round, Tanzel Smart, who they drafted in the 6th round, 2017, Samson Ebukam, Obanai Okoronkwo, Natrez Patrick, Traven Howard, and Troy Reeder. So kind of going through those guys, who would you say, just comparing the two, obviously, but then who would you say has the best unit? Because I think they're relatively similar.
Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of grouped it into front 7 because, the Panthers are going to be the same way. You're going to see a 4-3, 3-4 mix. So, you can break it up, linebackers, and defensive fronts. But, especially with the Panthers, guys like Burns and Irvin and Addison, they're going to have to play both 3-4 outside linebacker and 4-3 defensive end. So, and then I'm really excited to see how that front is utilized. The 3-4, we know who the front 3 are going to be. It's going to be Poe, it's going to be Short, it's going to be McCoy. And then you'll have Kuechly and Thompson in the middle, and then you'll rotate guys like I said, Addison, Irvin, Burns, Haynes, who I really like. I think the 3-4, and I've said this I think a couple times on my podcast. The move to the 3-4, I think, is really good. If there's one guy that really is going to benefit from the move to the 3-4, it's going to be Marquise Haynes, because Haynes will now be in a position where he can stand he can be in a 2-point stance at the outside linebacker position. He can and he can just get after the quarterback. He can really be kind of that pass rush specialist rather than having his hand in the dirt in a 4-3. So really excited what he's going to do for in the 3-4 for the Panthers. And you talked about Christian Miller. Injuries kind of bothered him a little bit when it came to some of his time at Alabama, but he's another guy that I think can eventually grow into kind of a pass rush specialist and maybe grow into an outside backer that can drop into coverage. So there's a lot of talent, I think, here on this on this front 7 for the Panthers. The Rams, look, they have arguably the best defensive line, or one of the best defensive lines in football. Anybody who's ever seen 1 minute of football knows who Aaron Donald is and knows how dominant he is. So, you really don't have to talk too much about him, because what's there to say about Donald that really hasn't been said already? Am I right? We've given him all the praise in the world, and deservedly so. There's not much you can say about him other than he's just an absolute freak of an athlete. Michael Brocker's still a strong defensive end. Dante Fowler, really came into his own since he came over to the Rams. I'll touch on something you brought up earlier, though, too, that's, I kind of agreed with. And I'm surprised myself that John Franklin Myers got cut as well, because it seemed like he was having a pretty good rookie season. So, I mean, I didn't get a chance to really see too much in the preseason, so I don't know if he just kind of fell out of favor or if it just became kind of a numbers game with him. But it was, really interesting to see that he got cut. But, you went out, you get Greg Gaines, big dude in the fourth round. Samson Ekebom, has had his moments at times during the Rams. He's a nice rotational piece. We'll see how much he fits into the equation. We'll see how much Ogbonnaya. I can never figure out his last name, but Ogbonnaya, how he'll factor into the rotation. And the linebackers, Corey Littleton, I think this is a bit of a revenge tour for him, right? Because he just seemed like he almost seemed like the punching bag for everybody's joke. I should say he almost seemed like a punchline for everybody's joke throughout the offseason because of how he was perceived to have played during the Super Bowl. So here's his chance to kind of get back at everyone and really kind of take charge of this offense. And you bring in Clay Matthews, kind of a bit of a revenge tour for him as well, right? Because he's still kind of upset about the way he was let go by the Packers. So, big chance for him to step up on a new team. And then Bryce Hager, the former seventh round pick. So starter wise, I mean, both teams have a good collection of talent. Maybe the Panthers have a little bit more on the bench, maybe especially more at the linebacker position, because I still like guys like Andre Smith and Jermaine Carter. They're two draft picks from 2018, especially Jermaine Carter. A lot of experience out of Maryland, really good tackler, really good special teamer, really good leader too. He can definitely develop, years down the road, because, who knows when Luke Kuechly will kind of step away. But Jermaine Carter has really turned into a quality backup in such a short time for the Panthers. So, really, really intriguing units here on both sides. Really excited to see how they go, especially against the running game. Todd Gurley against Luke Kuechly, and then, on the flip side, Christian McCaffrey against someone like Corey Littleton. So I think those are definitely two really good matchups to watch tomorrow.
Yeah, no, I would definitely agree with you, and I love what you said about Corey Littleton because, I mean, I just think really it's a pattern. It seems like Rams fans really just don't like linebackers. I mean, going back to Alec Ogletree, even if he made a huge play, he always had, that giant X on his back.
He did.
It seemed like Micah Kaiser was literally the only linebacker that Rams fans liked, and Dakota Allen. And Dakota Allen surprisingly got cut, brought back on the practice squad. I think Micah Kaiser was definitely the plan for them. He was going to start. He suffers a pectoral injury that will probably hold him out for the rest of the year, but it doesn't matter because they IR'd him before, the season started, so he's done. But, I think with Bryce Hager, he's not going to play long. He might play 25 to 35% of snaps. I think you're going to see a lot of Taylor Rapp in his place. Rapp just operates so well around the line of scrimmage. So to me, I think that they really like his game overall. They're really just, they're glad to have Corey Littleton back. I know, albeit I know people are going to make fun of, Corey Littleton, and I don't really get it, because all this guy really seems to do is make plays. I mean, he may not be, fully refined, but I think everyone forgot, the type of production that you get and how cheap the production was last year. And just the fact that it was his first year as a starter, I felt like I was really impressed with what he was able to do. Plus he had the interception in the Super Bowl, that they weren't really able to take advantage of. So, I definitely agree with you. I agree with you with Clay Matthews. I think this is probably the best system he could have fallen into, post Packers career. But, looking at the Panthers, I really liked Marquise Haynes. I think, this, like you said, I think it definitely is going to help him. Like I said, Christian Miller, somebody that I really like, but I think he's more of a long-term guy. Might not be extremely high on the depth chart this year, and he did have those injuries. So, I guess the worry is he might be an injury away from like really taking a step back, in his development. But I'm a really, really big fan of Brian Burns. I was a huge fan of Vernon Butler. It just doesn't look like you're going to get what you wanted to out of Vernon Butler when he was drafted in the first round. That's a shame. But, now all of a sudden that pickup with Gerald McCoy that we kind of looked at was, it was kind of a luxury move, right? I mean, no, it really wasn't when you really think about it. You can't, obviously Obata could have started, but or Vernon Butler, but I mean, that Gerald McCoy pickup was pretty huge. And if he plays any bit like he has in the past, I think that's definitely going to be one of the best pickups of the off season. But moving on, we have the secondary, and I think there's some good corners in this game. I think there's some good safeties in this game. I think the Rams secondary as a whole has been somewhat underrated. It's very rare when you have, a team that's able to acquire, somebody like Marcus Peters and Aqib Talib and have a guy like Nickel Roby-Coleman and not really get talked about in that conversation. Partly because last year Marcus Peters had his worst season, wasn't the impact player, the playmaker that he had been throughout the course of his career. Aqib Talib got hurt early on and really didn't come back until later on. And I think just the world that isn't a Rams fan hates Nickel Roby-Coleman because of the, infamous PI.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think, I really like what the Rams did with their cornerbacks. They're really deep. I think they have a lot of guys that they had to cut this year or had to move on from that, could go on and play somewhere else. Kevin Peterson he didn't make the roster. He was cut and claimed by the Cardinals, which makes me wonder how high he was cut or how high he was claimed on the waiver priority order, because Cardinals had number one waiver priority. But they have guys like Nickel Roby-Coleman, Darius Williams, who they got from Baltimore after they cut him and tried to get him back on the practice squad when they had to make room for Jimmy Smith. And then, just looking, obviously David Long, 3rd round pick out of Michigan, they really like. I think he's more of a long-term piece. He didn't really show up all that much in preseason until later on, and I thought guys outplayed him. But again, long-term piece I'm excited for. And then Troy Hill, somebody that he's been on the team for a bit now, and they ended up giving him a 2-year contract extension. So they really like him. I know the fans, you talk about, a guy that the fans will make fun of. Troy Hill is always, he's got a giant red X on his back. But then when you look at, Carolina, it's Dante Jackson, it's James Bradbury. They have Ross Cockrell, who I was a really big fan of when he was on the Steelers. I thought he was a perfect nickel for their defense, and then they ended up getting Mike Hilton. And then they just picked up Natrell Jamerson, who was cut by Green Bay. And they have I believe they have Colin Jones, but he's going to play safety, I believe. So, their secondary after that, they have Trey Boston, who came back, a guy that was drafted by them previously. And he comes back, and then they have Eric Reed, Rashawn Golden, 3rd round pick from 2018 from Tennessee, somebody that had a ton of fans throughout the draft community and had that versatility I really liked and felt like he could have been even a 2nd round pick. I don't think he tested all that well, and I think that's why he fell. But there's a lot of talent there. Javian Elliott as well. So what are your thoughts on these two units? I think you said you gave the edge to the Panthers as far as front 7 altogether. The defensive line you gave to the Rams. What are you looking at? Here with the cornerbacks and safeties.
Yeah, you have to give the Rams, I think, the edge here. Marcus Peters is going to bounce back. He's not going to stay that bad for that long. I think that was just kind of a fluke year. He'll bounce back. He's still one of the best corners in the league, as is Aqib Talib. And then, John Johnson, Eric Weddle, you really don't have too many safety duos in the league right now that are as good or better than Johnson and Weddle. So this is just a really, really good secondary. And, real quick, just in terms of like a matchup for tomorrow, I think it's going to cause problems. As much as I was harping on DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, these guys are going to cause problems for them tomorrow, I think. And, it's definitely a matchup that the Panthers are going to have to overcome if they're going to spring the upset here. But you really got to like those four guys. And then, you're right. Like on the one hand, you said people weren't really talking about the Rams secondary, and then you brought up Nickel Roby Coleman, and you're right. They're talking about him, just not in the way they wanted to be talking about. Everyone was focusing on that one play against the Saints, but he's still a good backup corner. And then you mentioned Taylor Rapp, like you said, he'll kind of be in that Deion Buchanan type role in that hybrid spot. So really intrigued. And Rapp's a guy that's a lot of people had as a first-round talent. He looked really good coming out of Washington, so kind of slipped a little bit, but works out in the Rams' favor. He gets to be with a guy like Wade Phillips. It's really going to bring out the best in him. So, you got some good depth pieces here at the secondary. And then the Panthers, I have some concerns about the Panthers secondary, namely James Bradbury, who I think really needs kind of a fire lit under him. I really wasn't overly impressed with his 2018 season. And then Trey Boston comes in a week into training camp, which, by the way, told me that they weren't happy with the development of Rashawn Golden, because Golden had gone the entire offseason as the starting safety. And a week into training camp, they have to go and get Trey Boston. Now, I liked Trey Boston, and I had said I was surprised that he was a free agent for this long. It's just taking him some time to get up to speed. He's been kind of up and down in these first couple of preseason games, but he'll get there with time. He should develop a little bit. Look at someone like Eric Reed. He didn't get there until like week 4 of the regular season, and it kind of took him a little bit of time to get back acclimated to everything. So I think Trey Boston will get there. But, James Bradbury, I'd like to see some improvement out of him. But, Dante Jackson's coming off a terrific rookie season. And then, like I said, Eric Reed is still pretty solid. And then behind them, first I should mention too, Javian Elliott, who you kind of touched on a bit too. What a real good pickup Elliott has been so far too. They get him from the Buccaneers during the offseason, and no one's really talking about him at the nickel position. First, Corn Elder was getting a shot, and Cole Luke was getting a shot, and then they tried Rashawn Golden there a little bit after they signed Boston. But then here comes Elliott, and he just wrestles that starting job away from everybody and never really looked back. And now he's going to enter week 1 as the starting nickel. So, props to him and props to the Panthers for finding this young talent. And then, a lot of the depth pieces are really good. Even, we'll mention a guy like Rashawn Golden. He's still on the team because he has that versatility, like you said. We've seen him run with the first team at safety. We've seen him get reps at nickel, so he can kind of play both roles. And we knew that was the type of player that he was coming out of Tennessee. We expected him to play a little bit of safety. We expected him to play a little bit of corner. So in that sense, he's good to have as a backup. Same with Ross Cockrell, another guy that had first-team reps at the safety position and can also play corner. So that definitely helped with the Panthers as well. Probably even saved a roster spot or two because of that versatility. And then, they did cut Corn Elder. I was a little disappointed to see that, but Corn Elder's a guy that really can only play the nickel, and already having guys like Cockrell and Golden that can step in there, especially Golden, there really wasn't a lot of room for Corn Elder. They did go out and claim. We talked about the 2 receivers that they claimed. They also went out and claimed a defensive back, another pretty good versatile one in Natrell Jamerson, formerly of the Packers, I think an original draft pick of the Saints. So, intrigued to see what they're going to do there. So you got some good good pieces in the backfield there, uh, at least behind the starters for the Panthers. But I mean, let's face it. Like I said, there's really you look around the league. There's really not a lot of group of defensive backs, at least the starters, that are better than what the Rams have.
Yeah, no, I definitely can agree with you there. I think what you said with Marcus Peters was perfect. I totally just remembered while you were talking about the secondary that I didn't mention the Rams safeties. I went over all of all of the Panthers secondary, but I totally forgot about the Rams safeties, which is funny. Yeah, Marquis Christian and Taylor Rapp are going to be the guys behind Weddle and Johnson, and I could definitely expect Taylor Rapp to have a huge role. Marquis Christian made this roster. He's a free agent after this year. Kind of, had a bigger role last year. It was his biggest role to date, so it'll be interesting with him. And of course, Nick Scott, the 7th-round pick out of Penn State, he's going to be more of a special teamer. I would really highly doubt he sees any time on the defensive side of the ball, and if he does, that's not a good sign. Nothing against him, but that would mean that they are really, really thin at the position. Probably a bunch of injuries. But, when I look at this, I agree with you. I mean, I think Trey Boston coming in was kind of a, signal that, Rashawn Golden might not have been ready or they didn't like where he was at in his production. But, like you reinforced with his, obviously with his, versatility, it kind of keeps guys like that in the league for a while. Anybody that can play multiple positions, no matter if they're great or they're good or they're average, like you said, it can kind of save, one or two roster spots. And with you guys keeping a fullback and Alex Arma, it kind of takes away another position that you could have made. But I mean, it also helps because having a fullback I think it is valuable if you have the right one.
Norv Turner loves him. Turner
and
loves having Alex Arma. He doesn't carry the ball a lot. He's not a big focal point of the offense, but Norv Turner loves having him. And he's,
and I wanted to touch
it's
on
nice
that
to
we
see.
Didn't mention him.
What's that?
Oh, because we didn't mention him, so I just wanted to bring him up.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, we know fullbacks are kind of a dying breed, but the Panthers are one of the few remaining teams that do still employ a true fullback, and he's really turned out to be a really good one. Like I said, he won't carry a lot of times. He's not really utilized a lot in the offense, but no fullback really is unless you're someone like John Ritchie all those years ago. The really good fullbacks, but he'll catch passes for the Panthers every now and then. He basically does what you want a good fullback to do. So it's nice having him around.
I definitely agree with you there. The Rams, they drafted Sam Rogers, who looks like the best fullback in that draft a couple years back out of Virginia Tech. And, it didn't work out, but the thing I think people forget is fullbacks are they're more athletic, offensive linemen really that, they can block, they can move, they can go out, and it helps the offense. It kind of gives you that extra edge, and really football is all about how you want to play, your strategy. I mean, you can have all different strategies, and that's why teams have them. Teams don't have fullbacks. So it's really cool. Anytime you have a team that uses the fullback correctly, they're the fullback tight ends, of course, H-backs, like, the Rams traded for Derek Carrier a couple years back. And, that made sense. And then he ended up going to the Raiders. Rhett Ellison is another one. He plays for the Giants. I guess that was my biggest issue with the tight end room for the Rams because they don't, I would honestly, it sounds stupid and Rams fans don't agree with me. But I actually wouldn't mind going out and grabbing a Lee Smith who's available. Somebody that, you can have if you need that guy in, a situation, a guy that can really block because the Rams just don't have any blocking tight ends you can rely on. And so to me, Rhett Ellison in this league is valuable. He may not be valuable for your fantasy team, but doesn't mean he isn't valuable in the game of football. So, I think Alex Arma, I don't know a ton about him, but I definitely think, obviously he makes sense for Norv Turner's offense. And I'm glad you brought up, North Turner, because I think, obviously his offense, I think, is really going to be big for Cam Newton to kind of progress. And I think he can really, reach his full potential. I mean, obviously you'd love to see this guy be able to run for, 1,000 yards and really show off his mobility. But at the end of the day, you want to keep Cam Newton healthy. And we've seen the cautionary tales of, RG3. And it's like, you can have a mobile quarterback, but it's probably, when you're looking at mobility, it's probably best to be more like Aaron Rodgers. He can take off and run for 30 yards and just move around and run off schedule and everything, then be the guy that's entirely a running quarterback. And so I think that's really what they're trying to do with Cam Newton, and it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Having that mobility, even if they do try to cut down on it, just him still being able to get out there and having guys like North Turner and Scott has really been beneficial. And it's another one of the big reasons why we expect big things out of guys like DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel, because North Turner is the type of offensive mind that can really get the most out of the speed and just the versatility and the horizontal stretchability, the vertical stretchability of both these guys. So watching this offense go is really going to be fascinating, just to see how these receivers are used, where they're lined up, just what they do in general. It's going to be just really fun to watch, I think.
I definitely agree with you. And as we wrap this thing up, let's wrap it up the right way. We all know, anybody that is listening, obviously they want to know our thoughts and how this game's going to go down. What's your prediction on this one, Bill?
This is going to be a tight one. I really feel like the Panthers just have the ability to kind of keep the Rams in check. I mean, look, it's week one. These teams are going to get off to a little bit of a sluggish start, I think. We saw, like I said earlier, we kind of saw it in the Thursday night game. Sometimes these teams just take a while to get clicking, and in the case of the Packers and Bears, or in the case of the Packers, it took about 3.5 quarters for them to get clicking. For the Bears, I think they're still trying to get their feet wet, especially after that lovely interception thrown by Trubisky late in the game. But this is kind of one of those, because we always get one of those weird week one results, and I'm not saying this would be like one of those weird results, but this could definitely be a spot where I think you have the Rams coming over from the West Coast to the East Coast for a 1:00 kickoff. We know that always kind of messes with the West Coast team. All the Panthers have to do is just kind of get after Goff a little bit, rattle him, and just kind of keep this offense in check. And if they can do that, I think they have the explosive ability to put up enough points that they could make this a little bit of a battle. I don't think they necessarily have to get in a shootout with the Rams. I think they can win like a 28-21 type game, or 27-24 type game. I think it's going to come down to defense late, I think. And it may come down to who has the ball last, but I feel the Panthers have a shot to win this game. I don't think it's going to be as much of a runaway. If when you looked at when the schedule came out back in April, and you saw the Rams were opening with the Panthers, you may have thought, oh, well, that's an easy week one win. Well, I don't think so. I think this is going to be a lot closer game than most people might realize. The Panthers, I think, are it's their home opener. They're going to be fired up. I think they're out to prove that last year was a fluke, right? This isn't really a Panthers team that is going to go out and lose 7 games in a row, or lose a bunch of games in such a quick time. So I think they're going to be ready. And I really think the Panthers have a shot to come away with the win here. Would I be surprised if the Rams win? Absolutely not. These are two very good teams. These are, the Rams are obviously a Super Bowl contender again. The Panthers are trying to work their way back up to being a playoff contender. But I really do feel like this is a game that can go either way. The Panthers are not as bad of a team, I think, now as people might think. If they look at last season, I think they're kind of underrating the Panthers quite a bit, and I think they're going to surprise some people tomorrow.
I definitely could see that. I think really it's going to come down to, is this offense going to just kind of come out and just blow out the Panthers like right from the get-go? Like, are they going to go for the jugular early on? Are they going to go for the deep play? Or is Todd Gurley going to hit the home run? And, to me, I kind of see that. I kind of see, McVay's kind of sat on this. He's probably tired of hearing how, his team only scored 3 points in the Super Bowl. And I think, it sounds lame, but I kind of felt bad for whoever got the Rams week 1 of the regular season, because I feel like no matter how good, you play, I think at the end of the day, no matter how bad this defense plays for the Rams, and I don't think they're going to play bad, but I just think the Rams offense is going to be energized. I do think, last year that was new. They hadn't sat out all of preseason before, but they did. And, it was interesting thing Steve Young says, they might go 2-2 to start, but by sitting your players, you're guaranteeing health and you're guaranteeing that, they're rested. And, he's like, they're going to be fine. Well, they didn't end up losing until week 9. They went 8-0 and they lost to the Saints. So I think it's kind of going to be more of the same. I have the Rams in kind of a different type of game, 37-21. And I think it's going to be like 30-21 late in the game. Rams kind of score, one of those garbage touchdowns. But that's kind of where I see it. I think, the Rams haven't won a game the last 3 meetings in Carolina. And I believe the last time they played in Carolina, they lost Sam Bradford. It was the hit by Mike Mitchell. That was the end of that era, really. So, it's going to be interesting, obviously, playing Carolina and playing them in Carolina, because that's the last time they played. And, I just think, Steve, I remember the Steve Smith talk, the trash talking with Janoris Jenkins, like it was yesterday. But, I have 37-21. Doesn't necessarily mean this game won't be close for a bit. I do think just the problem that teams are going to run into is I don't know how teams are going to be able to stop the Rams if Jared Goff gets at least average protection, because there's just so much. I mean, you think about the Super Bowl again, they didn't have Cooper Kupp. Kupp has by having Kupp, Woods, and Cooks out there, someone's guaranteed to be open just about every time. And if you try anything, where you try to double team any of them, someone's going to have an opportunity. And then when you look at the tight ends and you look at the running backs and the ability to, obviously catch out of the backfield, all 3 of those guys, it's just going to be really a pain to be able to defend them. And I think, somebody like Cooks could get it started off, over the top, maybe on, Bradbury. And then, I do think, as much as I like the front 7 of the Panthers, I think Todd Gurley's going over 100 yards. It's really hard to lose a game when Todd Gurley goes over 100 yards. Their win percentage when that happens is really high. But I do think the Rams are going to win this football game. And I don't think this is the end of the Panthers. I think, like you said, they're going to prove, people that last year was a fluke, losing, the last 7 or 8 games of the season. I mean, this was a team going into that going into that Steelers game. I think people forgot. I mean, these were 2 juggernauts battling it out. The Steelers had just fixed their offense, and, because they had that, kind of rough patch at the beginning, and you were starting to see the Steelers, for what they were. And I think the Panthers really got the Steelers at the worst time. I think they were finally, turning that corner and turning into a potential playoff team, which it's kind of hard to believe they didn't make the playoffs last year. Same with Carolina. But I think they really got them at the worst time. And I don't really think they handled that loss particularly well, getting blown out on prime time. But yeah, that's my take. Who would you say is the player of the game?
If it's the Panthers, if the Panthers are going to win this game, it's probably going to have to be Christian McCaffrey. I think he he really needs to step up. Again, I said DJ Moore and Curtis Samuel. It'll be interesting to see how they're utilized, but it's going to be a tough challenge for them against that Rams secondary. I think you're going to have to see Christian McCaffrey really break through a lot. I mentioned before, Rivera had talked about kind of cutting back a little bit on McCaffrey, but I don't think you're going to see that here in week 1. So for the Panthers, it's going to have to be Christian McCaffrey. For the Rams, I'll say, as kind of bland as it sounds, it's going to be Jared Goff. If Goff can kind of put his past behind him, like we talked about with the Panthers trying to prove this was a fluke. You mentioned the Rams are trying to prove last year was kind of a fluke, or at least some of those results. If Goff can get past that and get back to being the Goff that we know he can be, and the Goff that is going to be worth $130+ million, then he's probably going to be the biggest reason why the Rams win this game.
I think that's definitely fair. Wrapping this up, I think the player of the game, if the Panthers win, is going to be DJ Moore, because I think that's why they won. If you told me, say we fast forward to week 2, I wake up and all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, the Rams lost to the Panthers. I'd be like, how'd that happen? It would have to be DJ Moore. His explosive ability, we saw it even in the game where, the Panthers, I don't believe, really had much of a chance in the game against the Falcons last year. If I'm mistaken, I might be mistaken, but he had that long touchdown. It was like, I forget, it was like 90 yards. You saw the explosive playmaking ability of DJ Moore. I wasn't as high, on him as the consensus during the draft, but, he kind of made me more of a believer, watching him throughout the season. And I just think, really, if the Panthers want to have a shot of really just taking over and completing the upset, I think obviously the checklist, McCaffrey has to have his type of game. He has to really be able to keep them in this game. Cam Newton needs to avoid the turnovers. He needs to stay healthy, of course. And I think Cam Newton's arm talent allows him to obviously be able to find DJ Moore up the seam. And to me, I think DJ Moore is going to hit. He's gonna hit something in this game. I think he might he's either gonna blow by Peters or Aqib Talib. There's one busted coverage play every single football game, no matter who you turn on. And I think it's pretty safe to say that there's going to be one on both sides. I think DJ Moore will probably benefit, and I think Brandon Cooks will probably benefit on the other side. But I would say DJ Moore, and then I'd probably say for the Rams, I think it's going to be Todd Gurley, because Gurley, we've seen in the past where if Goff is having a rough game, they can turn to him and just let him take over. They did it against it was against the Denver Broncos last year in a game that was really weird. Goff had never played in that altitude, and you could definitely tell it bothered him, especially with the fact that it snowed. And because of it, he wasn't able to really do anything. And so they really just let Todd Gurley carry the ball. And I believe he went over 200 total yards of offense and kind of carried him to that win in what was really a close game. So I think, Todd Gurley's going to end up being like the MVP of this game for the Rams. I think the player of the game for the Panthers, of course, is going to be DJ Moore. But that just about does it. Hope you guys enjoy. Bill, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a blast. And, we'll definitely have to have you on again, as we're doing this, because of course, while you do cover the Panthers, you're also a writer for Downtown Rams. So, football. I mean, obviously it's pretty obvious. So, would love to have you back on.
Yeah, anytime, man. This was definitely a lot of fun to talk with you. So yeah, anytime you want to have me on, I'll be glad to jump on.
Sounds good. All right, guys. Thanks again for tuning in. This has been the Downtown Rams podcast. It's been episode 240. For Jake Ellenbogen, he's Bill Riccette, and Alexis Kraft couldn't make it, but she is also, thankful for you guys tuning in. This has been the show. Hope you guys enjoy. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, and enjoy the game tomorrow. We'll be back after the game. I'll have a quick podcast kind of wrapping up the game, and then we'll break it down in detail on Monday, Alexis and I. So thanks again, guys, and take care.